Hey everybody, what's going on? Rob Cisternino back here with this week's Survivor burning question. And I think this is going to be a fun topic to talk about. I just got back from Toronto where we had a great live show this week, sold out show for Survivor on Wednesday night when we watched this final 7 vote go down. And really, it brought down the house. Everybody was going nuts when Danny got voted out and Carolyn played her idol, but this was a really interesting vote for a couple of different reasons. And I thought that I wanted to talk a little bit more about this 3-2-2 vote, with the 2 votes for Carson being negated by Carolyn's idol. Now, most of the episode and the discussion around the episode has been about Carolyn and how she played her idol. And of course, we get it. Carolyn is one of the greatest reality TV figures to ever come out of Survivor. And so a lot of the focus goes on her, and also because that she gets so much of the airtime. And this idol play was flashy and certainly potentially meaningful to Carolyn's narrative with the jury. This vote did really hinge on Jaime and Lauren's decision to vote with Tika. Now, if you're following a lot of the survivors on the social media like I am, you may have seen that Lauren and Jaime have taken some exception to how this episode and maybe how parts of the season has been portrayed by the editing crew and how it's been perceived by the fans. And on Wednesday night, Lauren had a tweet that I noticed. She said, "When others play the middle, they're strategic beasts. But when we do, eyes emoji, make up y'all's mind." Now, this reaction got me to sit up a little bit in my chair and maybe notice a little bit about what's going on. Like most of the people watching the content like this, I think we're pretty sophisticated Survivor viewers. And we at least tend to believe that we have a pretty good idea of who might be the winners of the game and what that winning game should look like, even if we might have whiffed on the Ericas and the Gablers of the world. But are we letting the fact that Lauren and Jaime have had much less airtime than the Tika 3 blind us to what they're doing? Has the RHAP 2 actually become the true swing votes in the game? This week, I wanted to take a closer look at what the duo of Jaime and Lauren are up to and why they made the decision they did this week and where do they go from here. Now, my video all about how Gabler won Survivor 43 and all the editing clues hinting at it is how this whole series of The Burning Question got started. And I'll be thrilled to do it again for either Lauren or Jaime if they win. But today, I want to be more focused on their games and what's interesting about their position than some of the clues that may or may not be in the edit. So we're talking about just the game. Now, Jaime and Lauren, they've been seemingly on the same page through the entire game based on what we've seen. They started the season both as players who didn't cast a vote at the first tribal council, interestingly enough. Jaime played and hit the first shot in the dark in Survivor history, and Lauren banked her vote to earn an extra vote in the game. Even though Jaime got swapped to Soka, neither Jaime or Lauren went to another tribal council until the merge. When Jaime reunited with Brandon, Lauren, and Kane, she was seemingly back to being RHAP 2 strong. Now, the RHAP 2 alliance got to flex its muscle when Lauren, Jaime, Brandon got swapped together and voted off Matt Blankenship, firing a shot across the bow of Soka and splitting up the showmance. And on the very next vote, RHAP 2 tried to take out the other side of the showmance, but they got blindsided when Danny played his idol for Franny, sending Brandon home. And it was at the next vote that Jaime, Lauren, and Kane were betrayed by Jam Jam and Carson, who made a very slick move to vote with RHAP 2 on the vote where Brandon went home. And then Jam Jam and Carson double-crossed them again when they voted out Kane instead of putting votes on Danny and Heidi. For Jam Jam and Carson, they got a 2-for-1 deal where they betrayed RHAP 2 for 2 votes and RHAP 2 only realized it for one of the biggest moves of the season. After the Kane vote, Lauren and Jaime had lost their advantages, Lauren's real vote and Jaime's fake idol, which was believed real by all. And at the final 8, with no other allies or advantages, they looked to be in a pretty desperate position. When Franny won reward at the final 8, she took Lauren with her, leaving Jaime back at camp. And interestingly, this gave the Ratu 2 one voice in both of the conversations happening at that point in time. Jaime got to be part of the conversations about taking out Franny, how she's the biggest threat. She also talked about how she had lost her idol, even though nobody believed that story. And Lauren was there on the reward challenge to talk with all the moms with Franny about voting against Danny. Now, we see Carolyn and Franny come to Jaime and Lauren before the final 8 tribal council to try to get the numbers on Danny. They talked to her about the story that Heidi said, where Danny claimed that, hey, I don't even need your numbers. And they talked about how that was kind of sus. Lauren suggested they change the vote to Heidi. Carolyn and Franny, they jump at that idea. It's unclear to us whether or not Lauren was trying to protect Danny, since that they had started working together, or if there was a different reason why she threw Heidi's name out. Either way, Franny and Carolyn bite, and then they become the only people that are not in on the plan to vote out Franny. Ultimately, it's Jaime, Lauren. They vote with Danny, Carson, and Jam Jam, and they take out Franny. And we set up this final 7. So, start of this week's episode, I went back through all of the scenes of the episode to try to get as much about what Jaime and Lauren are doing. And so, most of this story in this episode ends up being told from other people's perspectives, a lot of Carolyn, but we'll do our best to piece together what we know. Now, I thought this was really interesting that we open up the show and Danny is talking to Heidi and he's asking her, hey, do you know who wrote my name down? And Heidi's like, no, I don't know. I don't know about this. I don't know. Maybe Jam Jam. Lauren and Jaime say nothing. And I do wonder if Lauren knew more than she was saying. Certainly, she was part of those conversations that the moms were all having on the reward. And then it was also Lauren who threw out Heidi's name, which ultimately we see that Franny and Carolyn run with. And so possibly that would have been a vote split. I feel like that Lauren did know that it might have been Heidi who was the person who cast the vote for Danny. But I think very smartly, she doesn't say anything to Danny about this, because we see really this group of 4 talk together a lot at the start of the episode, while the Tika 3 is trying to sort out all of their business with Carolyn being blindsided. Now, one of the interesting things from the episode is that we also find out that Carolyn is very open to the idea of Lauren going home. She says that we'll tell Danny that Lauren should be the name we're going to write down. We also see at Tribal Council that Carolyn is going to end up writing down Lauren's name before she crosses it out. I think that's more meaningful as we try to figure out where things go from here. The Soka 2 of Danny and Heidi and the Ratu 2 talk about what they're going to do next. Danny is pushing hard for Tika to go home, as somewhere Franny scoffs. Really? Now, Danny? Since when? You're going to send the Tika home? Lauren says that she agrees with Danny that Tika is a threat. Lauren has a confessional where she says,
I just had to work with them to just survive in this game, but now they need to be split up.
And we have a scene where Jaime talks with Danny and Heidi, and they're talking about how they need to split up the Tika 3. Jaime in her confessional says she's nervous working with them, talking about Danny and Heidi, but they need to get broken up, the Tika 3. Jaime is in agreement with Danny and Heidi about voting out Jam Jam. We also saw earlier in the episode, Heidi says that, look, it would be hard to vote out Jam Jam. Danny said, it wouldn't be hard. I'd vote him out. It was hard to vote out Franny. But we know Jam Jam is the person that Danny and Heidi are talking about. And it also seems like that Jam Jam is the name that Lauren and Jaime were going to agree on. So it seems like that these 4, if Jam Jam was vulnerable at that tribal council, I believe that Jam Jam would have been the person who goes home. but Jam Jam wins immunity and everything changed. I don't think we realized how huge Jam Jam winning immunity was at the time, but I really believe that this entire episode and game changes on Jam Jam having immunity. Okay. So we get after the challenge, the Tika 3, they're feeling good. They had already been talking about the final 3. Carson says that if they can just get through this vote, they're going to have the majority. So Danny, Jaime, and Heidi are talking at the well. They want Carson to go home. And Jaime agrees with this. But Carson is an interesting player in the game because don't forget, Carson spent a lot of time at Ratu. I think that Carson might have a better relationship with Lauren than we had realized or that the show had highlighted. Carson talks to Jaime and Lauren, and he says, I think Danny is coming after him. He feels good enough with Jaime and Lauren that he can go and talk about how he's worried about Danny coming after him. He says, I think that we should split the votes that between the Tikas and you two, and let's split the votes. It doesn't have to be Danny. It could be Heidi. He says he would be open to either of them. And Carson comes away from this conversation. He tells Carolyn that he feels pretty sure that he has Lauren and Jaime. And this is a big thing that I don't think that we paid enough attention to, that Ratu feels like Carson is somebody that they can still work with, because from Lauren and Jaime's perspective, they feel like that Carson only betrayed them on the Kane vote. I don't think that they realized that he was in the loop on the Brandon vote where the idol got played. So we only, unfortunately, get one conversation between Jaime and Lauren in the episode, but their conversation about trusting Carson is going to be part of this decision. This is the only time that we hear from Jaime and Lauren talking to each other with nobody else around, so we can assume that they are being perfectly honest with each other. Jaime says, I feel like it's pretty equal at this point between Danny and Carson. Lauren says, yes. Jaime says, I mean, Danny is a threat, but he's not good at puzzles. He hasn't won immunity. Carson's won immunity, and he's great at puzzles. But Lauren says, I probably trust Carson more than I trust Danny. Now, this is interesting because I think that Danny is probably more trustworthy there's history between Ratu and Soka, but at this point in the game, I do think that Danny is probably more honest and forthcoming with the crew from Ratu. But Lauren still feels like that, going back to the beginning of the game, she has more trust in Carson. Jaime says, but I think Tika has the numbers. That would be the benefit in also getting Carson out. They're just going to pick us off one by one. So I think we get a little bit of insight. I think there's some daylight between Jaime and Lauren. It seems like that to me, that Jaime was probably more in favor of voting out Danny, that Lauren was more in favor of voting out Danny and keeping Carson. And maybe for Jaime, it would have been vice versa. But either way, Jaime tells us Tika is controlling everything, but Lauren and I have all the power. Do we want to go for Danny or do we want to go for Carson? And at this point, Jaime and Lauren have officially become the swing votes in who's going out at this tribal council. And they know it and they're loving it.
It's a great place to be in Survivorland. Yeah, isn't it fun? It's so cool. I love it. It moves so fast. I love this game so much.
So this vote has been pretty straightforward to this point. We have the 3 Tikas, the Ratu 2, and the Soka 2. And all of them have their own unique feelings about who should be the person to go home. But Carolyn's idol complicates everything. Carolyn, she is able to deduce that the votes are going on Carson and that Danny's lying to her. But she doesn't have a perfect read on the Ratu side of things. She feels like Lauren and Jaime are lying to her. She says that people are telling me that they're going to vote Danny and they're going to vote Carson. In reality, nobody is doing that. Everybody is giving Carolyn the right story with the exception of Danny and Heidi. Carolyn, she is going to decide to play her idol. She tells Carson about it, and it's unclear ultimately how this is going to work out. Now, we know that this was a 3-2-2 vote. There were actually 3 votes cast for Danny. Carolyn's idol play didn't change who was going to go home. But on the one hand, I think it did help establish Carolyn as a player with agency. And that could be a part of her winning story with the jury. The jury went nuts going back and watching this. Matt and Franny, they're like falling out of their seats. They love that Carolyn did this. In their mind, I don't think it matters ultimately that it did not change the outcome of the votes. But again, the votes didn't require an idol play. There were only the 2 votes for Carson, and Danny would have gone home with just the 3 votes from Tika and the 2 votes that were cast against Heidi. Now, Carolyn was worried about a second idol coming out, and so she's trying to protect herself. So you see her in the voting booth. She puts 4 fingers on the parchment. She's thinking about, okay, well, there's going to be maybe 4 votes on Danny, and then if Danny plays his idol, then I could go ahead and put 1 vote on Lauren, and then ultimately Lauren would go home with 1 vote. How is this going to affect what happens next? I think part of Lauren and Jaime's calculus was that Carson could vote with them on a future vote since they have that relationship going back to Ratu. What we don't know now is how did Carolyn's idol play change the dynamics between Carson and Carolyn. So while we saw Carson turn on Helen at the beginning of the season, I do think it's doubtful that Carson would turn against Carolyn. But Carolyn made herself into a big target, not only by making a big splash at tribal council, but also by writing down Lauren's name. By doing so, she's really made it harder for her and Lauren to be on the same page, thus weakening Lauren's position as a middle player. If you're on opposite sides of things, that it's very hard to be in the middle, especially at the final 6, when it's very difficult to even find a middle. We also have Heidi still left in the game. And like Carolyn going into this week, she also has an idol that nobody knows about. The story this season has been that the group with the lowest numbers seems to have the most power. And Heidi, being the one Soka, could in fact be that new person who is able to end up swinging. And her idol could also be in play, which could be really huge for Jaime and Lauren. So while Carolyn wrote down Lauren's name, Lauren happened to write down Heidi's name. I guess there could also be bad blood. But so far in this season, other than writing down Jam Jam's name, people do tend to get over these things pretty quickly. I suspect that necessity is going to bring Heidi together with Jaime and Lauren, the 2 women that just voted for her. Now, we need to also remember that Jaime and Lauren seem pretty convinced that Jam Jam needed to be the person to go before he won immunity. This is interesting because I think it could make Jam Jam the priority target for Lauren and Jaime and maybe even Heidi to vote for. But Jam Jam also strikes me as the person most likely to flip against Tika at this point. But I want to bring this all back to Jaime and Lauren. They look like they had a clear shot to the end before Brandon went home with their tight Ratu alliance of 4 and Lauren's extra vote. Then they look like they could have been goners after Kane went home with all their advantages. But at this point in time, they should be getting more credit for how they've played the last couple of weeks. They've been the new swing votes in the middle of this game, and I think that they've played themselves into a really great position. I think Carolyn's idol play, while ultimately not a big deal in terms of who went home, I do think that Carolyn's idol play inadvertently weakened their position moving forward. I think that their best hope now is that Heidi can see the writing on the wall and that it's time for them to go all in on taking out a Tika, and that Tika may tip their hand about who they're voting for, and another idol could get played, this time on the Tikas. After that, maybe vote out Jam Jam or Carolyn, whoever's left, and beat Carson in the fire and have a final 3 of Jaime, Lauren, and Heidi. That being said, the Tika trio is powerful because they can take up all the seats in the final three and not have to turn on one another. The problem with a duo like Jaime and Lauren is that they'll always have a +1 in their final three, which could end up stealing the win as they share the RHAP numbers that are on the jury. For Lauren and Jaime, I think only one can end up going to the end. That could be a favorable situation to be the spoiler with two of the Tikas sitting next to them at the end. If I had to guess who has the better chance, my money's going to be on Jaime, who I think if we could go back and going back to do the all hiding in plain sight story of Survivor 44, maybe we find out that it was Jaime who turned out to be the person whose word was their wand, who turned out to be the most valuable person in the game, and maybe could have been the person that somebody thought they could bring to the end, only to see them lose. So it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. It should be a very fun final six. I know we're talking about Lauren and Jaime, but we could potentially have a true 3-3 coming up at this next tribal council, which I think could be very interesting to see. I think that there is a non-zero possibility of rocks happening as well. I would advise that for Lauren and for Jaime. I think that this could be a point where they need to get one of the Tikas out no matter what happens. And so we'll see. But I guess there's also a scenario where if the two of them can make it to the final five, all you have to do is tempt one of the others to potentially get them to flip to take out somebody who's a threat. So either way, it's been a very fun season of Survivor. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Survivor Burning Question. I will be back with you live together with Stephen Fishback this Wednesday night. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.